We all have to unwrap the foil wrapper over our Tylenol. It's an inconvenience, but it makes us all safer. And although that's a crude analogy, there is some truth to that. That you'll get your guns, you just have to go through a little more of an extensive background. There will be due process in the red flag law, but it's going to be a judicial review. Now, there are some concerns with House File 9, and I'll just share some of those. There's definitions in there. A system of verification. What does that mean? Significant danger. It's a very subjective term. Ex parte orders. That's where the person that has the order placed against them isn't even in the room. So you're saying that my boyfriend is crazy, take his guns, but he's not in the room to hear this conversation to occur. When police officers are given the order to go get those guns, you want to be the one that walks up on the... No. Yeah, I mean, that didn't take long for us to have that nod, did it? Those are concerns for law enforcement, and we can work through them, I believe. There are models out there. Connecticut has had red flag for 19 years. The sun comes up every day in Connecticut. They're living there. Gun rights people have their guns, and they move forward every day. I don't know what the research says, if they have no issues with guns there or not. But those are some of the things we're going to have to work on to get the 87 counties sheriffs who represent their constituency. They're elected like Matt and I are, and represent their interests. I'll be honest, the rural Minnesota sheriffs are opposed to House File 8. It was a lot to get them to House File, they're opposed to 9. It was a lot to get them to 8 and agree to it, but they did it. And we talked to them long and hard about it. They think it's, again, something right. So I'll shut up. Smart Center, did you want me to
yes, tell us about Smart Center.
Briefly tell you that Senator Klein led the charge in the Senate. He authored the bill that would provide funding for bonding to build a building in Dakota County where law enforcement and other first responders would be able to train on how to handle those in crisis. And that's what we see a lot right now. I don't know what it is. I don't know if we've taken the stigma off and everyone is feeling more open to discuss their mental illness or not, but whatever the circumstances are, we're facing it in the field and we need to deal with it. So we break ground in I think 9 months, 8 months in April, and we're looking forward to that. It'll be a 1-year build, and then we'll have a building where we can have all sorts of really good training for firefighters, police officers, ambulance, and 911 dispatchers on how to handle people in crisis. Thank you. A pass to get a permit to carry. So I issue 4,000. How many do I deny annually?
300.
I hear 300.
500.
About 40. 1%. So what would the gun owners caucus say to me right there with that status?
I have a whole manner of questions for you, Sheriff, so let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. But what would that say? What's the easy comment about that? These are the rule followers, folks. The people who get guns don't apply for a permit from me because they already know ahead of time they will not be able to get one. So please understand that. And here's your first conundrum, right? That you make the law-abiding folk pass all these background checks when they're not the real ones with the problem anyway. The bad guys, the criminals, they don't come to my office. They know ahead of time that they're not going to be able to get a permit to carry. So in 2003, when I was at the state and they passed this law, a lot of law enforcement was afraid the world was going to come to an end. It hasn't. I don't know if there's all sorts of bona fide evidence to say that we're all safer because of it. Some would argue clearly that that's not the case. but we are here today. So that law is in effect for, and the Gun Owners Caucus would probably say right now is, I need to protect myself as a person that walks the streets at night or wherever. I want to have that right. So that's now you're hearing, now you're gonna start getting the arguments on both sides of the, I mean, you could Google this and read forever on the arguments side and side of the why the gun debate is the gun debate. If it was easy, we would have solved it already, folks, but we didn't.
Okay, lots of hands.
You had a question?
Yeah, I guess I just wonder, like, I find myself wondering all the time, you know, I have 4 kids in elementary school, and when you talk about Connecticut, I think Sandy Hook and 26 elementary school kids being killed in their classroom. There's not one day that goes by where I don't drop my kids off for school and wonder if they're gonna be okay. Not one day. And I just wonder, like, when we're making these calculations about whether it's, you know, whether we're gonna inconvenience people who wanna own guns, like, you're saying, okay, the people who shouldn't have guns aren't applying for permits, but the more guns we produce and the more we sell, the more we have on the streets, right? Because they're getting in their hands somehow. When do our kids matter as much as their inconvenience?
Sounds like the legislators' question.
That's the balance of interests, obviously, in societal versus individual, and at every level of trying to legislate and do it prudently. And I take that call very seriously. Obviously, I'm an advocate for these 2 bills only because I do know that they will create inconvenience. I do know that they'll create bureaucracy. I do know that they could have unintended consequences, but I think it is worth it in the scope of what we're dealing with in America today. I also think that if we have no legislative proposals on this subject, that means that we're giving up on the power of collective democracy to address one of the top 3 most critical issues in our society today. Surely there is something, as a democratic republic, that we are charged to do about this situation. And if not, then why have a democracy at all? And so I agree with you. I do think those kids' interests trump the inconvenience that these laws would create, and I'll continue to advocate for them on that basis. Maybe you're not.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I saw the reasons on the back of the application to deny. Are there other ways you can deny a permit to carry
Yeah, so I
that are just not there? Like, what if someone has mental health concerns? Like, is that?
I'll read it. So I do Rotaries and Lions clubs and, you know, rubber chicken dinners, stuff like that. Because that's my responsibility, to be in the community and talking about things. So one of the slides I use is, how do people with mental illness get guns, right? Because isn't that the kind of question we're after here? So they buy weapons from private sellers. There is no police on the internet, right? Straw sellers, everybody know what a straw seller is? Mm-hmm. My girlfriend is able to buy a gun or purchase a gun and pass the background check. I am not. She gets the gun and hands it to me.
Isn't that illegal?
Yes, it is very hard to enforce unless you make the case, right? And we have a U.S. attorney, Erica McDonald, who will make the case for us, but we have to have a clear identification of who it is, et cetera, et cetera. Some gun show loopholes are open, able to purchase guns without background checks. Now, if you buy it from a federal firearms dealer at the gun show, he has to have you fill out the form. And then the whole world of online, I've already talked about that. So in our permit to carry law, the threshold is you've been deemed, what is the language? I think it's you've been committed to the state as a mentally ill, which is a very high bar. So you have a lot of stuff going on beneath that isn't captured, because that's the law. You fill out the form, have you ever been committed to the state of Minnesota as mentally ill? Well, That's a whole state process that you must go through with a judge. But it doesn't talk about a lot of other things that could have occurred in your mental capacity where you probably shouldn't own a gun. But I can't ask that, right?
I have a question about that, when it was in Rainbow. There was a guy in the Echo Rainbow that had a cider with a very large gun, pistol. And as I was walking in the cop car, which was pulling in. Now, is there a law where an individual is able to carry a gun, you know, in plain sight? And you see signs, and I'm sure Rainbow had no guns allowed.
Yeah, you have to have a sign that says guns are not allowed, and then if there's someone with a gun, then you need to call 911 because they're violating that. And then they ask the person to leave or go put their gun in the car, if the person is a permit holder.
So let me ask you a question, Mr. Sheriff. Currently, under orders for protection, bail release orders, a bunch of different bail release conditions, a bunch of different things, you can take people who shouldn't have guns and tell them that they can't have guns. So if I was to file, let's say you and I are in an intimate relationship, I'm worried about you, I file an order for protection against you or a restraining order, and one of the things the judge says is, you can't have any guns.
Right.
So when you are sending your officers out to enforce those, what's the percentage that that's getting enforced currently?
I don't know that answer.
Because you said you don't like officers going and knocking on doors, because, I mean, who wants to be the guy taking the guns away from
Right.
crazies?
I don't know
That's
the
existing
percentage.
law. I'm
It
just
happens.
curious, what's your percentage?
It happened, well, I don't, I mean, I could have percentages about stuff all day long. How many
It's
percent?
2%.
How many, well, you already know the answer.
I do.
Then why are you asking me the question, I guess?
Because I'm trying to find out why we're not enforcing existing law to get guns away from people who shouldn't have them.
Well, we are though. Like I said,
2% of the time.
well, when the judge tells me to go out and get guns from somebody, we do.
But not all the sheriffs are doing that.
Well, I can't speak for all the sheriffs, but I will sure look into it. I'm sorry,
DeKalb County is not 100%.
100% of what?
You're not enforcing those orders 100% of the time.
So what's the 2% number mean?
In
I'm
Hennepin
only
County
enforcing
alone,
2% of the time I'm asked to go out and get guns?
If there are 100 orders, they are only enforcing it
Two
of those
times.
orders.
Well,
In Hennepin County.
In Hennepin County. In Dakota County, I believe Carol Evans said you guys are between 6 and 8% of the time. So you're a little bit better, but still, there's a lot of people out there.
send me an
who shouldn't
email,
have-
I'll look into it, but this is the first time I've heard of it. I mean, if Carol Levin is sitting in my office asking me this question, I will be looking into it, but this is the first time I've heard that. Thank you.
So just a couple thoughts on that. Is it possible that of the 100
I picked 100 at random. I
commitment
don't know
orders that they're
exactly.
going out to approach these people and transmit the commitment, that only 6 of those 100 had guns in the home? I mean, that would explain your statistic fairly handily. The other thing is, the mechanism of this red flag law, extreme risk protection order, is not primarily that Sheriff Leslie will pound on your door. It's that you will be notified, the community is concerned for your mental health, and here are outlets for you to turn in your weapons. You can go to your sheriff's office, your police office, you can go to this local firearms dealer, and it's only if that fails to occur that person would be subject to Sheriff Leslie's administrations. So it's primarily a voluntary law. So I think those might address your concerns. I guess the third thing I would say is, whenever there's arguments that existing laws are being insufficiently prosecuted, so we shouldn't pass new laws, my response is let's do both. Let's prosecute the laws we have effectively, but let's also craft new solutions to deal with what's a fairly significant problem. Matt?
Yeah, I guess my follow-up on that would be, what is the mechanism that we go about enforcing those laws more reliably? Like, what holes in enforcement? So Patrick noted a hole in enforcement. You've noted a hole in enforcement, a couple holes in enforcement. What other holes in enforcement are there, and how do we go about strengthening those?
You gotta bring it to my attention.
Yeah.
It's a thick book of laws.
Mhm.
We're pretty good about it. I mean, whenever I get a arrest, So Linda has a permit to carry. She doesn't, but I'm sorry. That's private information, I can't share it, but she doesn't. And she gets arrested for something that she shouldn't have a permit issued for. I put her permit in suspense. We do this every day. So if we can do that every day, I'm sure I can do that every day. I just need to know about it. So if there's holes where I'm not doing something, just let me know and I'll try to figure it out. I mean, I meet with judges monthly. And so if a judge would say, hey, Tim, you're only enforcing 6 to 8% of the orders where we tell you to go out and get guns from people. I'd say, well, that'll end then. I'm beholden to the law. I'm not, I mean, he passes them and I enforce them. And
That's just what you do.
It makes my life a lot easier just to let him pass them and me enforce them. So I will do my best. If you bring stuff to my attention that I missed or something, I'll do my best.
I think Bob was next.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So on this subject, I was thinking about how when cars were first invented, anyone that had the money to buy one could get one and just drive. There were no laws, there were no restrictions, no licenses, nothing. People could just go and buy a Ford Model A or whatever and just go drive. And then they started having issues, obviously. Pedestrians were in trouble because, people were just driving willy-nilly everywhere. So they started putting restrictions and having licenses and testing and making sure that there were laws on the road as far as which side of the road you drive on and when you have to stop and when you don't have to stop. All those things came about. Did they cause inconvenience? Yes. Did they prevent anyone from owning a car? No. All of us own a car, correct? We all know right now that if I buy a car, I can buy any car I want based on my income. And I just know that I have to register it, I have to license it, I have to get insurance on it. I have restrictions on me, but it doesn't prevent me in any way from having my right to own a car, unless I have a DWI or some other restriction on me for something I've done.
Well, thanks, and you touched on an issue, sort of an analogy dear to my speaking heart, and the people who've heard me speak on this before, I apologize for the repetition, but there are a lot of good parallels between traffic policy and gun violence policy in this country. 50 years ago, we had an enormously high rate of mortality per mile driven in this country. And then we intervened in a number of sort of innovative ways. There was reformation in seatbelt habits and driving traffic patterns. There was car design innovations. We came at it from a number of different directions based on, candidly, research and science. And those have been tremendously effective. So we've come to a solution. There wasn't a one-size-fits-all type solution, but we studied it as a medical public health problem, and we found solutions that were innovative. I have no doubt that there are better, wiser, and more effective solutions than background checks. And I also have no doubt that if we passed both these laws today, gun violence would still be a struggle for us tomorrow. It's going to take dealing with this as a public health threat and doing more research on it at the CDC and in the state of Minnesota to find solutions that are innovative and actually quite effective to have the sort of transformation that we've had in traffic that you described. So.
I'm gonna go. First off, my name is Bob Skopas. I work in traffic safety. I have done so for 30-some years. So, and you hit on, for me, the biggest parallel is research. That we've done our research and we are data-driven in traffic safety. We're not as data-driven in the gun side, partly because, at least in some segments, the research has been barred. So one of the things that I was hoping to see in our state legislature is funding for research. The other thing that I just wanted to mention, my background is in psychology. I actually side with the gun rights folks on this issue, and I deplore the fact that the term mental illness is making it into our laws, without any subtlety or nuance at all. And because as we know from the data that we do have, is that the mentally ill are far more likely to be victims of gun violence than they are perpetrators. And so there are subsegments, specific diagnoses that we should pay attention to. And we don't have that. We don't have the research. We don't have the ability to craft that law. So the laws are automatically a blunt tool there, and I think it does abridge people's rights unnecessarily when we do that. So I'd love to hear about both of those.
Yeah, those are great points. The funding one, I'll draft that bill today for research next year. Thank you. That's a good idea. You know, the way the red flag bill that passed the House, it was part of the public safety omnibus, and I've got it here. The way they sort of defined it was the background check bill. The way they sort of defined mental illness was not by a DRG or an interaction with a psychiatrist, which really would be invading patient privacy and HIPAA laws and everything else, and plus would be too nuanced to draft into legislation. I would also object to that. But it was defined based on interactions with law enforcement. So, leaving to an officer's discretion as he's going through these applications, if a person applying for a permit to purchase has had domestic assault visits or, previous convictions for stalking or so forth. And those may be closely linked with mental health diagnoses, but are not mental health diagnoses, and perhaps they are more an accurate measure of someone's potential for violence. So I think that's the way they got around that difficulty in that bill.
Thank you. In the background permit to carry bill, there's the law. There's three things. Must not have been committed to a treatment facility in Minnesota or elsewhere as chemically dependent unless you have completed treatment or your civil rights to possess a farm has been restored. Must not have been judicially committed to a treatment facility in Minnesota or elsewhere as mentally ill, quote unquote, developmentally disabled, quote unquote, or mentally defective or mentally ill and dangerous to the public. Must not be a peace officer who's been informally admitted to a treatment facility for chemical dependency unless you possess a certificate from the head of the treatment facility discharging or provisionally discharging you from that facility. So those are three things that we search for when you apply for a permit to carry.
I think Carol, you had a question?
I'm sorry, Carol?
No, go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm curious about, you mentioned if you were committed to the state. There are other forms where you can be found not competent to vote or to manage your finances. Do those automatically do anything about carrying a firearm?
I don't believe so. Only when you're committed, as civilly committed to the state. Must have been committed to a treatment facility, well, wait a second. Must not have been judicially committed to a treatment facility in Minnesota or elsewhere as mentally ill, developmentally disabled, or mentally defective. So you have to cross the threshold of civil commitment by a judge.
What about all the military grade weapons of war that are on our streets? How do we get rid of them?
Yeah,
Why
that's
do we
an
have
argument
weapons?
I hear occasionally is, I can't carry a bazooka down Robert Street, then why do I need an AR-15? I can't, and they're illegal to possess military grade weapons.
Isn't the AR, isn't that one?
No, it's not. It's a semi-automatic rifle. No, it's not illegal. No.
Oh, AK?
No, I think it's illegal.
It's legal. Yes, it's legal.
I can answer that. I can handle it. So he's correct. The AR type weapons are legal currently and are in use in this country. They were illegal briefly during the the Clinton administration. And there are propositions to ban them as well currently. Those did not.
Support that though?
Well, I tell you what, that's not before the legislature currently, and I'm focusing my energies on the red flag law and the background checks law. If we got to a ban on certain rifle types or firearm types, I would want to be very specific about the language. And so I guess I won't open-ended commit that I would support such a bill, but I would want to read specifically how it's written. So.
The point I was gonna bring up, there was a law that was passed, but it had a time.
Sunset.
Yeah, a sunset provision in it, and it was during George W. Bush's term in office, and he didn't renew it. But there was a federal ban on, I believe, like 1847s, and the magazines that can shoot 50 rounds in a minute or whatever and stuff like that. We had that for a while on the federal level.
Okay. So, my name's Carol, and I have a little bit of a story. So, when I first moved to the Twin Cities back in 1984, I lived here for about a month, and I got a phone call. It was really hard to get through. I got a phone call from my mom that a very good family friend had committed suicide by gun. Because she was a very good family friend. My father was the first responder, and found her. I didn't understand that until July 29, 2017, when I was talking to my parents, because a very close friend of mine was killed in Mendota Heights, Beverly Courtney. So I went through with the family what it was like to bury somebody who had been shot and killed, to go through, there wasn't a murder trial because the person pleaded guilty, but there was sentencing. So I grew up in a white middle class suburban family. I never thought that gun issues would hit so close to home. I've shot handguns, I've shot rifles. Little known fact, I've actually shot an Uzi. Okay, so I understand, I mean, people have a right to own guns, but they are affecting every aspect of our life. We don't talk that much about the suicides by gun. If somebody's gonna take their life and they choose to do it with a handgun, they're more likely to succeed than if they attempt to do it another way. We don't talk about that much, although it's starting to be in the news, about the daily shootings, about the people who are injured, whose lives are impacted forever. We hear about the mass murders, and that's usually how we're reacting, is after there's been a mass shooting and a lot of kids killed, or a lot of adults killed, then we start to react. We have kids who are traumatized because they're doing lockdown drills, where schools have made the decision to do active shooter drills without warning people that it's a drill. I've been teaching on workplace violence for almost 20 years. This is a real situation in workplaces that we have to deal with there as well. Minnesota OSHA hasn't really addressed it. They've talked about workplace violence plans, requiring it. They've started to do it for healthcare, but not for other industries. I totally agree with Bob, we need research. We don't have the statistics. Neither of you can tell us how many suicides by gunfire, how many people have been injured by gunfire. We don't have enough information. Is it really, do we address each of these situations in the same way? We're always reactionary. So my question is, one, research. Two, how do we stop being so reactionary and start to really solve the problem?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of feeds into my whole doctor mentality, so I apologize for going to that. But there's a number of sort of innovative solutions out there that have never been studied, and we sort of say, hey, what if that worked? And yeah, what if it did? Maybe, people have talked about smart weapons, which only are able to be fired if they're held with the palm print of the person who owns them. What if we intervened in terms of laws regulating home storage and so forth? Would that have an impact? It all sounds like a good idea, but we need to study it to find out if there are demographic differences, geographic differences, and how these things occur. And once a gun crime has occurred, to go back and research, what were your storing practices? Who owned this gun? Was it borrowed from a friend? Did that have an impact? Is it in an area of high poverty? Once we have numbers like that, we can design pretty incredible solutions. So I'm right with you. And, I kind of gave a tenuous answer to the military-style assault ban question. I just wanted to get the feeling of the room. So who here would support a statewide ban on military-style assault weapons? And who would oppose such a ban? All right, thank you.
Anybody else?
Real quick, does the Minnesota Department of Public Health collect data on suicides by firearm, homicide by firearm, aggravated assault involving a firearm? Either them or the BCA, I mean, they must be collecting that data, correct?
Not the Department of Health. You probably know there's a prohibition on them, at least getting data on firearm ownership in those circumstances.
Permit to carry holders,
On permit to carry, sorry?
just for permit to carry holders?
No, for everybody.
Oh, no.
So there's a prohibition on them obtaining firearm ownership data within current statute.
Involving in a crime?
Yes, or involved in a homicide or a suicide, yes.
So they can't collect data on a homicide involving a firearm?
At the Department of Health.
So the data that's out on their website that indicated 402 people in Minnesota committed suicide with a firearm last year, that's illegal for them to have?
Again, you're misrepresenting what I'm saying. They cannot, after the fact, look back and see information about who owned that gun. They can count the number. I think we all can do that. But they can't find out demographics of the owner or storage habits of the owner, where the gun was possessed, if it was borrowed, things that would be effective in crafting policy.
Something else with suicide. There are some people that, sorry, my voice is terrible tonight. Some people that, like, even if it was a suicide, wouldn't want to admit that someone did commit suicide. So, I mean, there are certain events, or whatever you want to call them, that people just don't go with, whether it's by gun or a drug overdose or what have you. Where you have a murder suicide or a husband and wife for some reason,
I don't have a big statement, but I'm gonna ask you just to share this real quick in the mic. And this kind of goes to what Heidi was saying as a parent, but also as a teacher. And this is just what our kids hear. For the lockdown.
Remain quiet. Help is on the way. You will be notified when it's safe. Lockdown. 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 Go into a secure room with a lockable door. Turn off the lights and remain quiet. Help is on the way. You will be notified when it's safe.
So the point being is that's just an example of what actually our kids are talking about when they go home and say, we had a lockdown drill. And I guess another concern as an educator too is that current practice right now is to, let me just shut this off really quick. I had to tape it because people wouldn't believe it when I tell them about it. But another concern as an educator is we're not like on current practices on how to keep the kids safe. It's kind of like huddle in the corner. So if someone comes in, everyone's in the corner, right? So I just needed to share that with you because we hear kids talking about that we had a lockdown. And that drill, that just keeps going. I have a recording of that for about 7 minutes, but it just keeps going and stuff. And so our kids are terrified, the trauma that they have. And I was in a pre-K room today, and a kid was building Legos, and he was like, "Oh, this is what's gonna happen when we have a lockdown with intruder," and that's pre-K. So just needed to put that out there.
It's not in every school, but I'm a teacher too, and ours is different than that, but it is, someone comes over the intercom, says, this is a lockdown, remain silent until the all clear is given, and then it's dead silent, and you don't know what's going on. You can't be on your phone, you can't be calling people, you have no idea if it's a drill, if it's not. They just say, this is a lockdown, and it goes silent. And
And this is also blasted in our school, it's
Yeah.
also blasted out in the neighborhood too.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it is scary, like, even when it's a drill, like, they cry, like, it's scary, so.
Kids come home talking about them.
So that's mad, in my opinion, I have 5 kids, I feel like that is madness. That we invested millions of dollars into our schools to prevent this from happening and traumatizing our kids with these alarms. Is there a way to reverse this? Is there a way to go back to where we can keep our front doors open?
You have to have a cop in the door.
No, yes, there is. I mean, yes, there's a way to change society. There's a way to make life better in America. I wouldn't have run for office if I didn't believe that. And doing what we're doing now is, as you say, reactionary. It's creating a solution that's a Band-Aid to what's a deeper problem. I'm interested in getting at the root of the deeper problems, wherever they may lie, and creating solutions so that the kids don't have to hear that alarm. So, with their hand up.
Does anybody have a theory on the burgeoning mental illness issues in society, on why we're seeing more and more people in crisis?
Well, I know it's gotten harder for mental health facilities to admit patients here in Minnesota. I have a good friend who experiences bipolar episodes, and over the past 10 years, it's gotten nearly impossible to get her into a hospital unless she walks up to the door and says, I want to be admitted. Even now, she's been homeless for 3 months now. She's in crisis, and there's nothing that anyone can do to help her.
We have unfortunately lots of data on this. It's a very complex issue, as you could imagine, but one issue is, I hate to say it, but we keep sending our young, mostly men, but young people off to war and not reintegrating them into society. Economics are a factor. Lack of mental health care access is a huge factor, and that is not getting better even if we have better health care access. The mental health care access is horrible and getting worse, as she mentioned. That kind of situation plays out all over, but especially in rural areas where there aren't practitioners. So who takes up the slack in those areas are pastors. And they have training in some things depending on where they went to school, but they're not mental health professionals. So there are drug problems as we've seen. I mean, just all over the place. But yeah, it's a lot of factors. My hand was up earlier with the school thing. I wanted to thank Mary Frances for sharing that. I'm friends with several elementary, junior high school educators. And I don't know if this is happening here in Minnesota, but folks in Florida and Virginia told me that they no longer leave the room when a fire alarm goes off. They wait for smoke to be encroaching into the room, or for someone to come and tell them it's safe to leave the room in a fire situation because it wasn't a fake alarm that somebody was waiting to shoot. That's where we're at. And that is maddening.
Yeah.
So the Parkland survivors, they have made a plan, and they just put that out. Do you know much about it, or have any opinion on that?
I saw something on Twitter real quick, but like a promise or something, was that what it was?
Well, it was fake, it was just more of their strategy, like how to, like deal with the school, the lockdowns, and stuff like that.
Parkland was an embarrassment for law enforcement because the school resource officer went away from the scene instead of going into the scene. I immediately changed my policy at the sheriff's office. We had a little bit of wiggle room in our policy that you could wait or you could assess, and I said, no, we own this. We're trained, I give you the equipment, I put you through the training. They're gonna turn their guns on you so they're not killing children. And if you didn't sign up for it, the door's over here. So, that was a tough conversation with some people in my office, but that's my policy.
How quickly could, someone get there?
Well, that's a happenstance, right? That's the call comes out and you happen to be driving by, 30 seconds. But if you're halfway across the county and the call comes out, it's 10 minutes. Because, I mean, you can only drive so fast without putting everybody at danger and yourself and not getting there, But you put out the call and you hope that by happenstance, the cop is right around the corner, which has happened. I mean, Ohio, there's been a couple others where the law enforcement officers have intervened and ended it. Not before there was death, but before there was more death. So that's my commitment, is that we will try to do our best to have them turn the wrath on us, not on the children. Yes, sir.
I have grandkids now, but my kids growing up, we would limit their social media time or their video time. Today, the videos have only gotten worse, and my grandkids now are limited. The more you watch, the more you get violent. The more guns you have, if you're violent, you can do that much more damage than if you don't have weapons. And we have more weapons and more guns than we used to. We have more guns and we have more weapons than most countries do, per capita.
Let's take 2 more questions.
So I just had a couple of things, or 2 different things, but, one, and I know, Matt, when we were at our last meeting discussing this, I brought up that if you are in a position where you are, can help, like with legislation or whatever, and you've never participated in a school lockdown drill, I suggest you contact a local principal and ask if you can see what that's like. Because it changes your perspective. The other thing is that I think we need to, when we're talking about the gun debate, there's a lot of, and I just call them excuses. It's the mental health, it's the video games, it's the this, it's the that, it's the whatever. No, it's not. It's people making a choice to use the gun in an inappropriate way. And we need to focus on that, not on what are all of these other excuses that we can have for why they might do this, but why do we have in this country so many guns that is not necessary. I don't understand why people keep saying it's my right to own a gun. I don't understand why this has to stay as a right. Like, it's a privilege. And if you look at other countries that are successful in their gun control laws, the amount they have to go through to own and then to keep their gun is extensive. So I don't understand why we can't say, they're doing it well, let's copy them. Like,
It's a constitutional thing, right? They always bring that up.
I don't care, we do not need a well-regulated militia, like.
We don't have one. Like, we don't have a well.
Right, like.
We do, it's called the National Guard.
Yeah,
Right.
but I'm just saying, like, we can still have the constitutional right, but we can also have all these other things in place to make sure that we have manageable gun laws. Like, I feel like there's just a lot of excuses being thrown out by people who are trying to keep their guns for whatever.
There's a whole room full of people here who wanna take one. This entire room raised their hands when Matt asked if who wanted to start sponsoring a bill.
So you're mischaracterizing what
Military style.
you are totally
Okay, but that is
mischaracterizing.
taking one, right?
We didn't say we wanted to take
Right.
your gun.
No, just,
Oh.
No, I'm okay with that. I
Cool.
don't
That's
think.
fine. Just be honest about it.
think you need a take gun?
I hope not, no.
But
Sheriff
even
Leslie
then,
never
I'm
needs one
sure
either.
there's some people that can have that and just store it in their house and be fine. But there's people out there that is not right for them, and they'll use it just to.
I don't disagree with you at all.
So, I mean, we need some.
The automatic magazine, I don't know if that's exactly what they're called, but where you have large capacity magazines, I mean, what's the purpose of that in a
I
home?
can see if you're a deer hunter or.
Yep, I think that we
let's continue that at the 5-8.
I would like to take the time to address questions to our 2 elected officials, and we can have this discussion after they leave. Very, very open to that, but I want to respect their time and everybody else's time. We have one more question over here.
Okay, when I'm
I'm hearing overall is this talk should be going on in the Senate. What can we do to get that going? What can we do to make sure this conversation isn't gonna do any good in this room? The Senate needs to be talking about it. What can we do to get the CDC research, to get us to look at Australia and how they did their gun buyback program? Can we use any of they're not falling apart. But what can we do to get this going in the Senate?
You know, the traditional and reflex response is elect Democrats, but I'm actually going to depart from that a little bit because I think this is becoming a big enough issue where there are Republicans in Republican seats who are no longer politically viable with their constituencies on this issue. The sands have shifted, and people want something that seems reasonable done on gun violence. So I think actually we'll be more effective in getting some policies enacted if some Republicans are brave enough to stay Republicans and support some of these measures. And to that end, I would reach out to suburban Republicans, Paul Anderson, Dan Hall, and say, you know, this is what the people in your district want, and can you find a way to join us on it? And barring that, we will replace them. But I think the way that large issues in this country, healthcare, et cetera, get transformed is that people from both parties start realizing that we need to make a change. Can I just make some closing comments here real quick?
Yeah, can I just ask, I just have one thing I want to mention, just before we go, and hopefully it'll be something that you can take away and think about, is just making sure that we create laws and implement laws in a just and fair way. That we consider all race and social backgrounds when we are writing these laws, and that we don't, that we're aware that some laws intentionally end up biased towards some people, and specifically marginalized communities. So.
You bet, and that's actually been an objection raised to the red flag laws because it's going to set up a lot of scenarios where guns are being removed from the homes of people of color, you know, often by Caucasian officers, and that creates all the difficulties that we've seen so far. So I agree, that's an issue that needs to be addressed prudentially going forward. So I just want to say a couple closing things. First of all, thank you very much for having this conversation. These are the types of hard conversations. I mean, I was a little nervous coming here tonight. I suppose a lot of people were. But if we don't do this, then what are we here for? Just the coffee? You know, this is what democracy is about. So thank you for having that hard conversation. And to that end, I want to thank specifically Pat Watson for making sure this isn't just everyone who agrees with each other. And Pat, you've been brave and civil and diligent in showing up repeatedly. So can we give a quick hand to Pat Watson? And I'll do it anytime on any subject. So thanks so much for coming out.
Thank you, Senator Klein, for being here, inviting me as well. So I have to agree with Chris and Matt that we need to have intelligent, relaxed, logical, unemotional conversations about these kind of things. We're smart, we're adults, we can do this. We can figure this out. It was in front of a marijuana group before last session, and I was shouted down. I was in the basement of the Capitol. The Capitol is where we have conversations like this. You don't have to agree with me, but you don't have to shout at me. I'm not going to shout at you while you're doing it. Let's just get along, right? Same at the gun debate. I testified on behalf of House File 8 last year, backing background checks, threats on my life. Failed. I think they called me some names, maybe wanted to come down from Duluth and do some harm to me, like remove my wings like a fly. So they were real threats, but this is the kind of emotion that goes with some of the territories, I guess, that we're dealing with. You know, just a selfish side. I'm constantly looking for people of color to come and work in my organization. I am, and it's really difficult. It's really difficult to find people. So if you know anybody who wants to join law enforcement, the doors are open. I have a unicorn. She just left me. A unicorn is a unique individual that's rare in the populace, right? Captain Dewana Witt, black female captain, an administrator. She was recruited for the last 9 months by Hutch in Hennepin County to come and be a major for her, and in return of a raise of about $30,000 a year that I could not match. So I lost my unicorn. I think I'm gonna be able to hire another black female. Don't tell anybody, because they'll come and recruit her. I have another one, and she's being in the psychological process right now. They are so rare, but we need them. We need them to represent their communities and do the work of upholding the law in a society like we have, this democracy that is so near and dear to our hearts. So please, if you know of anybody that's ever expressed an interest, even watching like a cop show, send them my way. Thanks for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.